All right, how's it going, everyone? Gamma Fighter here, coming at you with another Sylvaneth video. And in this video, we're going to be comparing the Lady of Vines with the Warsong Revenant. But why are we comparing these two heroes in particular? Well, it's because they both have a ward aura. So when allied Sylvaneth units are wholly within 12 inches of them, each of them can provide a ward save to those Sylvaneth units. And that's a really good ability, especially because our faction, Sylvaneth, is just so durable, so elite. We don't really have like throwaway units and stuff like that. We've got stuff like Spirit of Durthu, who you want to just keep alive as long as possible and then let him heal back up. And that extra bit of survivability can make a huge difference in our army. So I want to do comparison. You're probably not going to be able to take both of them in every army and do these overlapping circles, which would be really cool. But a lot of times it's going to be really difficult to fit them in there. So we'll take a look at the different strengths and weaknesses of both of them, how they differ from each other. I'll give an overall recommendation, but then you can take into account everything included in their strengths and weaknesses for which one's going to be better for your particular army. So let's start off with direct comparison. So these are things that really easy to compare to each other. For example, the Lady of Vines cost 70 points more than the Warsong Revenant. That's just an objective fact. And this is a pretty big deal because not counting the stuff that's going to Legends next year, the Warcry stuff, our cheapest unit is 110 points. So that's only a 40-point difference. So depending on how your list is set up, if you complete the list and you're using the Lady of Vines and you've got like 40 points left over, you could swap out in the Warsong Revenant for the Lady of Vines, and you could bring like another unit of Dryads. If you have 50 points left over, you could swap for the Warsong Revenant. You could bring a unit of Gossamed Archers. So that's a pretty big difference, a pretty big deal. It's 30% of the Warsong's cost. So pretty big deal there. I know it's 33%, but you knew what I was saying. So the Lady Vines is going to have to be quite a bit stronger to make up for that difference. So she's unique, which is another downside. So it means that you could technically bring two Warsong Revenants if you wanted to do that overlapping circle thing I was talking about. But probably the more relevant thing is that the Warsong Revenant, you can bring artifacts and heroic traits. Particularly Spellsinger can give the Warsong Revenant +1 to cast when he's near Awakened Wildwoods. That's pretty strong. And then you can also bring the Seed of Rebirth with the Warsong Revenant. He's very squishy, so if he gets picked off and or you have some bad positioning and he gets killed, the Seed of Rebirth might save your butt. So that can be pretty strong. So that's kind of another point in the Warsong Revenant's favor. The Lady Vines is a monster and the Warsong Revenant is infantry. All right, you guys, if you watch my other videos, you know I really like the Lady of Vines, but this is another point that goes to the Warsong Revenant. Not that I'm saying that these are all equal and I'm counting up points actually, but I'm just saying this is another factor that goes in the favor of the Warsong Revenant. So what's wrong with being a monster? Monsters do not benefit from the second part of the guarded hero ability. So what's guarded hero? That's an ability that all heroes have that becomes activated when they are within combat range of a friendly unit that is not also a hero. Okay, so it is what it sounds like. When they're near allied units that aren't heroes too, then the infantry or the cavalry or whatever it is guards the hero. The regular troops guard them. So it for both the Lady Vines and the Warsong Revenant, the enemy shooting attacks will have a -1 to hit them. So that's kind of the effect of the guarded hero that applies to both of them. The one that would only apply to the Warsong Revenant, though, is that enemies can't even target him if they're more than 12 inches away. So no sniping snipers. The exception is the things that ignore guarded hero, Stormcast, Long Strikes, Kurnoth Bow Hunters. Those won't be affected by that part of the ability, but they will still be -1 to hit them. But there's other shooting units in the game that are pretty strong. And so the Warsong Revenant being able to be protected from them when they're more than 12 inches away is actually kind of a big deal. Especially because also the Warsong hangs in the back anyways, and the Lady of Vines goes right up front. So all right, so the Lady of Vines is also a War Master. This is another negative for her. Um, so War Master means that a War Master must be the general of your army if you have a War Master in your army. So unless you bring a Lariel, who's the only other War Master in Sylvaneth, Lady of Vines has to be your general. That's a big downside because we're going to look at her health. She's a bit squishy, and she can be an easy target for the slay the entourage battle tactic, uh, where the enemy has to slay uh, someone in your general's regiment. They can slay her. You lose all of her utility and all the stuff that she was doing for you, but also you're just giving them 4 points for basically free victory points if you're not very careful with her. So that is a pretty big downside. The Warsong Revenant's also very squishy, but since he doesn't have to be your general, then you're not giving your opponent an easy target. All right, these are pretty comparable. Their movement. Lady Vines has 8 inches and the Warsong has 6 inches, but he can fly. You're not clearing that much stuff with just a 6 inch move, but it helps a bit. All right, Lady Vines has 8 health with a 3-up save. Warsong Revenant has 7 health with a 5-up save. Quite a bit squishier, but when you take into account their wards, the Lady Vines has a 5-up ward, but it's only available sometimes, which we'll look at in the next slide. And the Warsong Revenant has a 6-up ward that's always turned on automatically. So still quite a bit, yeah, the Warsong's quite a bit squishier than the Lady of Vines. But they're both not crazy durable. Especially, man, for being a monster, the Lady of Vines, you would think she would have more health. Okay. Um, they're both wizard level 2, so they can both cast and unbind 2 spells. And then they have Lady Vines has a control score of 5, Warsong has a control score of 2. Not going to come up too much. The Warsong, you're not going to be using him to get into combat and to contest objectives. It's more like he may be on one end of the objective, and then there's like a screen on the other end of the objective protecting him. But so he's just providing a little bit. Lady of Vines, maybe a little bit more relevant, a little point in her favor. She'll often be paired up with something because she's not super durable on her own. She'll probably be paired up with something like the Dryads or a Tree Lord or something like that, which, combined would be 15 points of control or 10 points of control, depending on which, for total, when you add them together. So she's a little bit more available to kind of contest those objectives. So, all right, now we've got the stuff that's a bit more unique. We'll start with the ward save aura that we can compare a little bit more directly, but then we'll have to go through them individually for the stuff that's really unique and hard to compare against one another. So the Lady of Vines ward aura is a 5-up ward. The Warsong Revenants is a 6-up. 5-up is twice as good as a 6-up. It's quite a bit better. It's very good, and it really increases our durability. I did a video going over the deep dive into the numbers on the Sylvaneth, durability and damage. So you can check that out if you want to see more. But yeah, that's a lot stronger. They're both wholly within 12 inches. And then the downside is the Lady of Vines' ward is not turned on automatically. It's only on casting a 7-up spell. This is a pretty big deal. Having the Warsong 6-up ward turned on all the time just makes it super reliable. The 7-up spell is a little bit better than a coin flip. I think it's like 58% chance to roll 7 or higher on a 2d6. So that's pretty good, but then you remember that the opponent has a chance to try and unbind it. So that makes it pretty unreliable, probably estimating around like 30 to 40% of the time when you're going to have it up, because your opponent is going to be saving their unbinds for this spell. This is really, really good spell. If you tell your opponent about it, if you don't hide it from them, they're going to know like, hey, this is the one. If I only have one unbind, I'm saving it for this ward spell because this is the one I cannot let go off. So that's a pretty big downside in my opinion. Now, in 4th edition, there's not very many bonuses to unbinding, so that's a good thing, but they still just have to roll one better than you did on the casting roll, and she can't get bonuses except with the place of power. But usually places of power are kind of on the outskirts of the map. I guess it depends on the terrain setup, but usually they're more on the sides, I've found. And so you don't want her on the sides, you want her in the middle where she can provide her aura to as many of your guys as possible. So anyways, all that is to say, it does make it really unreliable compared to just being turned on all the time. Now it's twice as good still, but you kind of have to make that decision for yourself, whether you'd have a stronger but less reliable version of the ward, or if you have the weaker ward but turned on all the time. All right. The Lady of Vines also, she counts as an awakened wildwood for the purposes of the faction traits. So the healing is it endless growth, the healing ability, the passive healing, the walk the hidden paths teleport, and the strike and fade teleport. She counts as an awakened wildwood for that. She doesn't count for other stuff like dryads are -1 to be hit and -1 to be wounded when they're within 6 inches of an awakened wildwood, wholly within. She doesn't count for that, which is really unfortunate, but she does count for those other abilities. So she also has a rampage. It's my favorite rampage in the game, maybe one of the top 3 rampages in the game. It's on a 2-up, which is the lowest you can get for a rampage roll. And she can give the enemy -1 to hit, or she can give allies +1 to hit that enemy. And the fact that you can choose is really strong. -1 to hit is really strong, especially there's a lot of stuff hitting on 4s, and even a lot of strong stuff, a lot of monsters and things like that hitting on 4s. So they go up to 5s, which is a lot worse. If you want another, more information on that, that's also in my deep dive where I talk about why the -1 to hit is worse, the worse that your roll is, your like 2-hit score is. So yeah, I won't go into the whole thing there, but yeah, it's flexible. You can use it defensively, you can use it offensively. Very, very powerful ability. But she has to be in combat for it to work, and she's pretty squishy, so you might not want to get her in combat. So trade-offs there. And then she has shooting and she has combat. It's not great. It's all right. It's helpful. It's not the reason that you take her, but it is there, unlike the Warsong Revenant, who's shooting or who has no shooting and combat is essentially non-existent. You really want to do your best to keep the Warsong out of combat. If your Warsong is in combat, either you made a really big mistake, or you're just losing, or your opponent made a mistake and they like charged in a wizard against your Warsong, and then you're like, all right, fine, let's do a wizard bonk, back and forth, pillow fight, you know. Anyways, all that is to say, don't put the Warsong in combat. All right, so what does the Warsong have? He gives -1 to enemy ward rolls within 12 inches. Man, that's really good. So his 6-up ward aura, it also affects enemies. They don't have to be wholly within, but if they're just touching within 12 inches, then the unit's ward rolls are shut down. So if the enemy has a 6-up ward save, they don't have a ward save anymore. That's like really good. And ward rolls tend to be like really bad. So going from like a 6-up ward save to a no ward save at all, that's a huge difference. It's 100%, you know what I mean? And then going from like a 5-up ward save to a 6-up ward save, you've cut their ward save in half. You've made it worse by 50%, which is really strong. That is a very good ability, especially if you have a lot of like Night Haunt in your meta, for example, a lot of undead. But Night Haunt's kind of a boogeyman in the format right now, and they have 6-up ward saves on everything. I think they have one hero that has a 5-up ward save, but everything else has 6-up ward save. Oh, and Nagash has like a 4-up, maybe a 5-up. But the point is that you can completely shut down those ward saves, and then your Kurnoth Hunter Greatswords can just have all their damage go through. You don't have to worry about your opponent saving any of it. So that can be a pretty big deal. So I don't want to overstate it, but it's pretty good. He also has, when the Warsong is casting, the opponent has -1 to unbind his spells. That's also really strong. I talked about that. One of the problems with the Lady of Vines is that her ward is on a spell that can be unbound. So your opponent can just get lucky and roll higher than you, and they'll unbind your spell. But with the Warsong, they have to roll 2 higher than you rolled. That's a really big deal. The other thing is the rules don't care if the spell is like a 7-up spell. If the Warsong rolls a 10, your opponent has to beat it by 1, so they have to roll an 11, but then he gives them -1, so they have to get boxcars. They have a 1 in 36 chance of being able to unbind it at all, which is the worst possible chance for them to unbind it. So it can make it really consistent to cast spells with the Warsong Revenant, give him the Spell Singer, and it's even better. So that's really strong. I like that. It also affects banish rolls for manifestations that the Warsong summoned. It's not quite as impactful as the Unbind rule because it does care about the banish score. So on the Warscroll for the manifestations, they'll have a score to banish them. And so it'll bump it from like needing a 6 to banish to a 7 up, or from like a 7 up to an 8 up. Yeah, there's also going from an 8 up to a 9 up, which is a bigger deal, but um not quite as impactful just because you're dealing with lower numbers and it's a bell curve, the distribution of the 2d6 roll. So it has more of an impact the higher the roll is. So yeah, that's pretty unique, very rare ability in fourth edition. I really like it. All right, and then finally, I said that you don't want him to be in combat. So how does he do any damage? Well, it's this spell right here. He's got that thing where you roll a d3 and on a 2 up, you do that much damage. He can hit up to 3 targets with this. The casting roll is a 7, and it's on his Warscroll. And the range of it is really interesting. The enemies have to be within 9 inches of an awakened wildwood, and then that awakened wildwood has to be wholly within 18 inches of the Warsong Revenant. And when you set up an awakened wildwood using the tree song spell, then that awakened wildwood has to be wholly within 18 anyways. So you got 2 casts if you use one to set up a spell. Or sorry, to set up an awakened wildwood wholly within 18 inches, and you set that awakened wildwood within 9 inches of 3 different enemy units, then you can cast this spell. You can hit all of them with that, which is pretty good chip damage. It's not crazy damage. In third edition, Warsong had a Warscroll spell that was so powerful that there were pretty much for a long time the strongest way to play Sylvaneth was to base your whole strategy around helping him get that spell off. So like pretty broken. This is way toned down, but we have a lot of chip damage with mortal damage. And so having another way to do that just makes it that much more effective. So it's pretty good. And it may be a good way. We've talked a lot in fourth edition that we have to be super careful placing our awakened wildwoods because the opponent can charge them now when they used to not be able to. And then they can pile in 3 inches into your units. So if you have it a bad positioning, you can actually shorten the opponent's charge distance, which is really, really bad. So one way you can get around that is you might just summon this as soon as you can, as far on your opponent's side of the field as you can, and try and get as much damage as you can with this. And then they may have to clear it out just to make sure that they don't keep taking this damage throughout the rest of the game with the Warsong spell. So they may waste like a bunch of damage going into a awakened wildwood, and then you can summon it again because you can only have up to 3 awakened wildwoods. So maybe a good way to deal with that. Just throw a sacrifice tree out there, get some chip damage off, make your opponent waste their time dealing with it. That could be a pretty strong strategy. All right, so now for these different factors, it's really hard to compare them against one another. So you're gonna have to make the decision for yourself. For me, I talked about that I really like the Lady of Vines, and I still really do, but I think now that I've had some time to look at it and see how people are list building, see how I build my lists, and really take a sober look at them, I really think the Warsong Revenant generally is going to be the stronger choice. And just to go over a little bit, he's cheaper and he's infantry and he's not War Master. He doesn't have to be your general. This being defended by the guarded hero is quite strong. Not giving up a free battle tactic to your opponent is a lot stronger too. And then a really big factor for me too is that I'd rather have the reliable ward save than a stronger ward save that is much less reliable. When it comes down to it for me, it's a dice game, but you want to minimize the variance as much as possible. So I do think the Warsong Revenant's a stronger candidate now than the Lady of Vines. Now that can always change. They can make tweaks and things like that. or when we get our battle tome, there may be some abilities that she can use or things that synergize with the Lady of Vines better. And of course, they can always drop her points as well. But as it is currently, I do think the Warsong Revenant is the stronger choice when you're particularly looking at the utility from getting that ward, and then what other utility does he bring? I just think the difference is just a bit too strong to ignore. So I would go with the Warsong. And then the other caveat is, though, there are going to be lists that you may be building right now where the Lady of Vines is stronger. And in that case, don't let some guy, I'm literally just a guy on YouTube, don't let some guy tell you that you shouldn't bring the Lady of Vines. Make the choice for yourself for that particular army. And then, of course, if you really like the kit, the model, and you just prefer her, that's fine too. Totally fine. So those are my thoughts on it. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment what your thoughts are on this. Have you done this comparison before and taken a look at it? Which one do you prefer and why? And maybe I'm way off base. I would love it if someone proved me wrong and was able to prove that the Lady of Vines is way stronger. That would be awesome. Um, yeah, so I really like her. But I love the Warsong Revenant too. So that's it for me. I know it's been a little bit. I waited a week between uploads. I've been painting a lot, talking about Sylvaneth so much is fun, but it also just makes me want to paint more. So the more that I talk about it, the more I want to paint. So I painted a tree lord. I really love how it turned out. I'm super grateful. So maybe someday I can share my army with you guys, or at least my paint scheme. But yeah, that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate it. And let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. And until the next one, I look forward to seeing you then.